That's what. Yeah, November.
Yeah, I'm not ready. I haven't gotten warm to my bones yet. Like I need to get all the way warm to my way. And then when I'm cold all the way to my bones, I'm ready for summer.
Right. Wow. Thanks for coming, everyone, and taking time out of your evening to enjoy a little snack and learn about the progress on our master plan. If I haven't met you yet, I'm Gloria Koshberger. I'm the town administrator. And this is my second year and some here. So it's exciting to be with you all. We are going to be learning about our priorities for the next year as we dive into budget planning. It's only been 11 months since we adopted our 2022 master plan, but we've accomplished a lot and we have a lot coming down the pipeline. No pun intended with our wastewater plant. I didn't write that down. That's why I don't go off script. Okay. So there was a master plan planning progress spreadsheet shared in the meeting packet, and that was published on Monday. So you can get more details on the specifics, since what I'll be doing tonight is very high level. After this high level presentation, we're going to dive into some of our big priorities, which is our wastewater treatment plant project. So we have a technical assistance team here that's going to be presenting after me to talk about our upcoming infrastructure progress and implications on future rates and kind of what that might look like in the future. Next, after that presentation, we'll have the community planning strategies, talking us through our code alignment with the master plan and leading up to the code rewrite. We just picked a consulting company for that code rewrite. It's Clarion. And she will be jumping online tonight. Her name's Elizabeth Garvin, and she will be jumping on tonight to say hello and introduce herself. So I really appreciate that last minute kind of scheduling for her. We had planned on concluding the night with a Parks, Recs, and Facilities update, but we'll need to reschedule that. The packet does have a comprehensive PowerPoint as well as a Kendall project sheets that a community can review, and that's part of our Kendall planning implementation. So, and if you have any questions on that, you can ask me after these presentations, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. So settle in, get some food, and we'll begin. Next slide, please. How many of you were involved in the master planning process? I like to see the show of hands. All right, about half of you, excellent. And that was our number. So the master plan is intended to be used for the next 10 years. In 2023, we appropriated $587,158 from the general fund towards initiatives identified in the master plan. So a breakdown of these appropriations can be found in the 2023 budget narrative published with the 2023 budget on our website. And then let's review the goal areas. And then if you have follow-up questions, feel free to email me, and I'll have a scheduled office hours that you can sign up for at the end of this slide. And also feel free to raise your hand at any point. Yes.
Could you speak louder?
Oh, I can absolutely speak louder. Yep. All right, next slide, please. So I won't cover everything on this slide as we have other presentations that will go over some of these topics. A couple areas of note in the slide is the expanding electrification for the existing grid. The town, in the partnership with San Miguel Power Association, the county, and a regional nonprofit called Eco Action Partners, recently received a $100,000 prize to work on a resiliency plan for Silverton that includes a microgrid and beneficial electrification initiatives. The first step is creating a reliable power grid here, including capitalizing on potential solar energy. So it's a big planning process. This puts us in line for the phase 2, and it was a nationwide competition, and Silverton was one of 67 of the winners. So very excited about that. We also received $554,703 in grant funding from CDOT for a reduced version of the Blair Street Revitalization Project. We applied for DOT funding, so that's Department of Transportation funding for the entire project, using those CDOT as funds as our match. But recent correspondence with the Department of Transportation looks like we'll not be receiving those funds for the entire amount. So it will be presented to the trustees soon to look for alternative solutions on how we're going to move forward with the reduced project. Next slide. All right. Silverton Single Track, we're calling you out on this one, has been successful in their grants to complete a portion of the Bakers Park Trails plan with the construction underway, and they're still pursue funding for the entire project. So we actually have a letter of recommendation in our next meeting packet for you all. For the last couple of years, the town has supported MSI and other initiatives through nonprofit requests. And we've adopted a special events guide that can be found on our website and have online fillable format for special events. And then the town partnered with Silverton Creative District to facilitate Summer Sounds, as well as a Nisi Park dedication that will be on September 9th. And that is when we will officially be opening our restroom building. And it's not just restrooms. We have office space, we have garage space, we have an information center. It's a pretty incredible building, and we're really excited to have this opening ceremony. This will be the new dedication from Columbine Park going to Anisi Park. So we'll be calling it Anisi Park after that dedication ceremony. Next slide, please. So these were not identified in the master plan, but support the goal of strengthening our local economy. San Juan Development Association went through a rigorous application process to become a certified Main Street community to support our businesses. This gives us access to resources, including funding, and that's kind of the main reason why we are pursuing the status. A shared position with the town and San Juan Development Association was created out of a grant received by the Department of Local Affairs. And we now have a community projects and housing coordinator. Her name is Ann Chase, and she is sitting right there in the middle. So just wave. Thank you. She started on Monday, and she will be overseen by Beth at San Juan Development Association, but we'll also be working with the town closely on affordable housing as well as community projects identified in the master plan. So we're really excited to have her on board. The grant was also able to fund a shared grant administrator position that will work part-time and help San Juan Development Association and the town acquire more funding for projects. So we are building our capacity right now to be able to capitalize on all the funding that's coming down from the federal level to the state to us. Next slide, please. So I will let CPS and Elizabeth explain the code revisions and upcoming code rewrite as it relates to the master plan. But the town has been navigating and prioritizing to clearly define environmental and wildlife habitat protections as part of a land use development code. So we have adopted a definition of a wetland and paused applications that meet that definition until January 31st, 2024. In the meantime, we have put a call out for bids to provide the trustees with an inventory, including scope and scale of wetlands in town. We've also separated out the Historic Review Committee from the Planning Commission. This was at the request of the Planning Commission and in pursuit of a certified local government status that will provide businesses, residents, and the town funding opportunities to preserve historic buildings without a match. So that's really the big push for that. So we are currently recruiting for this new committee. It's a very exciting committee to be on. And applications are due on October 2nd. So if you are interested in historic preservation, please apply to be on the committee. All right, next slide, please. And I know I'm running through these, but we got a lot tonight, so I was trying to do a big one. Do we have any questions in the interim? Okay. So we are excited to have a full-time housing coordinator on board this week. And she will be working on the funding for the build out of Anvil. I think this is all about you, Ann, actually. I'm just really excited you're here. So she'll be working on the build out of Anvil as well as other initiatives in the master plan. And the town is creating a municipal housing authority to allow us to borrow funds for residential projects. So a petition was circulated and approved by the trustees at the August 14th meeting, and a resolution formally establishing the committee will be presented at the August 28th meeting. So the next meeting coming up. And the town will be the authority board. But in its inception, it will just be used for the ability to borrow funds. So it's really a mechanism to allow us to borrow those funds so we can get some projects off the ground. And then I will let CPS review the code changes that we have implemented towards affordable housing in their presentation. Next slide, please. All right. This area of the master plan is not identified to be a sole town responsibility. There has been a lot of progress made. And the town and the chamber have worked together with grant funds from the county tourism board to install information signs at entrances to town. The QR codes link to agency websites and trail information. The goal of power redundancy, renewable energy, and retrofitting homes with beneficial electrification were all initiatives in the Department of Energy's prize that we just recently received. And while we received that prize, they have also San Miguel Power Association has just turned in a grant, a $5 million grant for a solar microgrid in Silverton. So we're all crossing our fingers that that is approved. Next slide, please. All right. So we have now held 3 engagement nights with the community in the last 11 months. Last year, I gave a budget presentation along with an opportunity for communities to vote on implementing specific plans. At the beginning of the summer, we held an informational night and welcome back summer residents and businesses with service leaders in the community presenting. It was kind of like what would people call it? A science fair, because we all had our boards all around the room and it was fun. And then tonight's presentation is another attempt to continue informing the community and creating understanding. And the upcoming code rewrite that we have will be a similar process to the Compass Master Plan, where we'll be asking for a lot of engagement as we hone in on our identified goals and agree on policy. And then recently, and this is probably the thing I'm most excited about, but my staff all rolled their eyes. But the town purchased a budgeting software to help with the organization, transparency, and efficiency of our future budgets. So up until this year, we have been using an Excel spreadsheet for all of our budgeting. And this software will save me and the clerk numerous hours in time in preparing the budget and reduce the margin for error, as our current bookkeeping system software can talk to this software. So yesterday, I just got my actuals uploaded and I didn't have to enter them myself. And it was just a glorious day. So there'll also be a dedicated webpage where citizens will be able to view the budget and break it down with graphs, digestible chunks, really be able to play with how they receive that information. And this system also includes a robust capital improvements component, which is identified in our master plan to start implementing a capital improvements program. So I am very excited to roll this out this fall, and you all should be very excited as well. All right. Next slide. All right. So if you have additional questions or concerns that you would like to speak with me with, I have a QR code up here, which you can access my calendar and book a time with me. And yeah, is there any questions after my really quick overview? And there's also printouts of the master plan spreadsheet right over there if you guys want to view what we've done, basically. So any questions? Yeah.
Is there wind side in the solar array?
Potentially. Yeah, we have a lot of potential areas at this point, but it would mostly be in the county, which is why we're partnering.
Wondering what side of town that would be on.
Mhm.
Should that be 5 more stuff?
Yeah.
And there's like land engagements on that. Just wondering how people will be.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that we'll have more information. This is really the planning stages. So once we start formulating those plans, that's another area where the community can engage.
Gloria, I got the inside track because your husband always tells us stuff at work.
Great.
Well, that property where the EPA is doing that, stuff, where they're doing all that mitigation work up there, who owns that?
So that was given to the county.
The county.
Yeah, so that all was given to the county in the recent plan.
That
Mhm.
relates to his question about solar.
Yeah. Yeah, potentially. All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
How do you apply for the Historic Review Committee?
Oh, you can go on our website.
Thanks, Nathan.
You can go on our website and it's on the front page there. You can click on the link to apply. So it's pretty easy. So on the front page of our website, we have little tabs and it'll say apply. Great. All right. So next up, we have our technical assistance team for our wastewater crew. Come on up. We've been working with you guys for
Almost a year.
almost a year now.
You're up first.
First. So I'll let you guys introduce yourself because I didn't get a bio before. Otherwise, I would have done that. So come on up. Thanks.
Oh, how do we?
Oh, and then your slides will come up here in a sec. There we go.
Good afternoon, everybody. You'll have to forgive me. I'm actually an hour ahead. I'm from Wichita, so I'm thinking it's a little bit later. Is it still technically afternoon or are we evening yet? Well, so glad to see so many of you here today. Go ahead and click to the next slide for us, would you? So we're here to talk about the wastewater treatment plant and what kind of some of the next steps potentially could be to update that, what that means for the community, what that means for our natural resources in the area and all that good stuff, what that process might be, and gather your feedback, what you're thinking of the wastewater treatment here in Silverton. And as Gloria alluded to a little bit before, having some tough financial conversations, right? So next slide, please. So a little bit about us. This is our team. I'm Michelle DeHaven. I work for the Environmental Finance Center out of Wichita State University. I often get the question, why is someone from Wichita in Colorado? We are an environmental finance center. We work primarily in Region 7, which is Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, and Missouri. But we also work on national projects where we serve as kind of free technical assistance and consulting to communities just like Silverton, who may not have the resources to hire a consulting firm that do exactly what we do. And Emily is also with U.S. Water Alliance, and they are also part of our team as well on a pilot program that was funded by EPA. In the middle is Mike Tate, who works with me at the ESC. He is a fabulous vacation and regrets being able to have to miss this. He serves as kind of our technical person. So if you want to know the ins and outs of a wastewater treatment plant and John's not available, Mike Tate is the guy to talk to. So he wishes he could be here. He extends a hearty hello and we'll just continue. Did you want to go ahead and?
Sure. And my name is Emily Simonson. I work for the Rinky Dink nonprofit part of our technical assistance team. The U.S. Water Alliance basically advances policies and partnerships that try to build a sustainable water future for all communities. And so we work with utilities across the country on the gambit of water management issues. Sorry, I'll come over here. Be right back. So we run the gamut on water and environmental issues. And on this team, I've been keeping an eye out for ways that Silverton can innovate, ways to make sure that at every step of this process, we're hearing from members of the community about what's most important to you. That's the team.
Excuse me. Go ahead, next slide, please. I apologize. I'm still getting over a little altitude adjustment. As I said, I'm from Kansas, which is at 0. Y'all are a little bit higher, so I apologize for the coughing. I promise it's not contagious. So we're part of what we're calling a community solutions pilot project. And the purpose of this project was to see what it would take for organizations like mine and Emily's and other EFCs across the nation to be able to help communities like Silverton access some of the historic funding, as it's being called, coming down the pipeline from federal government through the states down to communities. So the hope is us to be able to help communities access that funding by evaluating their needs, where they're at, what they might need in order to be able to apply for that funding, or how they can best use that potential funding in order to meet their water and wastewater infrastructure goals. And so this was a pilot program that was built with money just before all the bipartisan infrastructure law money started flowing all over the place through the states and the federal government. And so this was a way to kind of set up and get ready for that funding to come to see how these kinds of programs could work. And so what we do is we start with a needs assessment and understand what's happening in the community. What are their needs? What are their future needs? What are the barriers and the challenges and the pluses and the positives and all of those things? How can we bring that all together to make a plan for the community to move forward with their goals? Excuse me. And that's looking at that technical piece, like what is happening with the wastewater system? Is it doing what it needs to do? What kind of the managerial capacity is? So, you know, keeping an eye on John back here, making sure he's up to par. Just kidding. He's fantastic to work with. And the financial elements of it are the big one, right? How are we going to pay for it? And how are we going to keep paying for it? So we can pay to build a new wastewater treatment plant, but it has to continuously operate for the next 20 or 30 years, whatever its lifespan is. How are we going to pay for that as well? And then also making sure that that financial burden is not borne by those in the community who might find it burdensome, and how we can make sure that the community is fully engaged in having these conversations and that we're hearing all of these voices. So that's kind of the pilot team that comes in and does this initial groundwork. Next slide, please.
Okay, who's got a phone with them that has access to it? We're gonna do a little exercise. So take out your phone.
In some of our workshops, we say, we know you want to get your phone out to check your text anyway, so go ahead and do that now.
Yeah, so there's a QR code up on screen. If it's too small for your camera, open a browser and go to menti, MENTI.com. Oh, there we go. And enter the code 1152429. And when you do so, you're going to be asked a question. And that question is really, what do you think of when you think of the value of water and wastewater infrastructure? And you can enter 3 words. And if this thing is working right, it should auto-populate on the screen and just help take the group's temperature on what we're thinking. And I'm going to do it too, just to make sure it's working. I wish we had walk-on music while we would.
We should. I could play some.
No.
I should have had it queued up.
Didn't get it.
Well, it didn't work.
John can sing, right?
No.
Wait, did you pull it up right?
Enter a word.
Okay, this thing is not auto-populating. So let's switch that up. What are some of the words that you mentioned?
Critical,
Critical. What else?
invaluable,
Invaluable. Hygiene. Hygiene. Huge. We all like to keep it fresh. Yes, hygiene. Environment. Beautiful place, right? Ability. Development association.
survival,
Survival. Any others?
drinking,
Okay. Hopefully not the wastewater, but drinking water. Yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. We can go to the next slide. So whenever my organization is out talking to folks about the value of water and wastewater infrastructure, we like to say that wastewater infrastructure and drinking water infrastructure is critical public health infrastructure. It keeps our communities safe, keeps us away from contaminants. More than that, it protects the places we love. It protects our environment, our ecosystems, our fish, downstream waters, and it protects our neighbors, everybody who's downstream of us and might have to draw on our old wastewater for their drinking water. We also know that without these services, we can't have our businesses. And, you know, if you kind of mess up your infrastructure, you're dealing with some pretty hefty fines from the state of Colorado. So next slide, please. And for those who aren't eat, sleep, drinking, wastewater issues here in Silverton, I wanted to just start with a little bit of a primer around what does your wastewater infrastructure look like? And so if you're looking at this picture, you can see the wastewater lagoon down in the left-hand corner, circled by the little red dot. And all the wastewater in the community flows to this area where through a natural settling process with some aeration, the waste settles to the bottom, the water becomes cleaner, and then it's eventually discharged into the Animas River and flows down to Durango, right? This system is 30 years old. It's already starting to have some hiccups every now and then. And it's not currently designed to reduce nutrient pollution. So when you think of nutrients, you can think of things like nitrogen, like phosphorus, naturally come up in our wastewater, but when they're in too much, when the quantity of those things is too high, really damage the ecosystem and make all those downstream communities using that water for drinking water. It can be really hard on their drinking water plants to try to get that stuff out. So another aspect of this plant that makes Silverton a little unique is the plant deals with significantly more volume in the summer, right? And that puts additional stress on this plant that's really reached the end of its anticipated lifespan. One thing to note is every time that the plant discharges wastewater that is not in line with the permit that you have to discharge from the state of Colorado, Silverton could be fined by the state. The state hasn't been finding Silverton for the few times that it has happened because they know that this community is proactively working on solutions. But it's something to keep in mind because you want to be proactive, solve the thing, and avoid the cost of penalties later. So can we go to the next slide? All of this is really leading to, we have new demands on the system. The community is way different than it was 30 years ago. We have a different type of economy here in Silverton. And we have this nutrient issue. If the state or the federal government decide to increase the regulations on nutrient pollution, right now your lagoon isn't going to be able to keep up with those new demands. So what are the options? There are a lot of options. A lot of them are customizable. One of the standard options that we've been thinking about is a mechanical wastewater treatment plant, which the benefit of is there's, instead of just, one kind of natural filter way of treatment, you have 3 primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment that would help Silverton make sure you're in compliance with the state regs, that the water you're discharging is protecting your local wildlife and downstream communities. So that said, there's a lot of different ways that you can design your plant to meet Silverton's specific needs. So I don't want to present this as if it's done, right? As if it's the solution, as if we know exactly what's happening. We're in early stages of this project. And I think what's important is we have a process in place where we hope to line you up to go through and make the right decisions, figure out what design considerations you need, what rates are going to be. And I'm going to turn it to Michelle to talk about that process that I hope you've enjoyed learning just a little bit enough to be dangerous about the current state of play with Silverton's wastewater system.
Yep, so
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
we have high nitrogen phosphorus in our wastewater.
I will let John answer that question.
It's not out of compliance, but it's much higher than what the new regulations will be in a few years. And no, there's no way that a lagoon system can, and they vary, but it's much higher than what nitrous and phosphorus will be in 5 years.
Do you know what caused that? Wastewater.
Lack of the proper kind of treatment. Lagoon systems were not designed to treat nitrogen and phosphorus at the levels that the EPA wants to take them to.
And it's very natural for there to be and phosphorus in wastewater. And sometimes when it rains, if you have a system that allows the rainwater to go into your lagoon, it can come off your roads and ag, and we don't have ag. But there's a lot of different sources for how nitrogen and phosphorus and other nutrients. Good question. Anyone else before we go into process? Awesome. Okay.
Next slide, please. So this was developed several months ago, and we've already had to adjust it just a little bit based on, when you first start with needs assessments and those kinds of things, that anytime you're walking through a process like this, there's going to be adaptations to the steps. The steps are the same, but they may have to change. So we started with just a community needs assessment, right? We talked to John, we talked to Gloria, we did some research, we looked at census data, we looked at old water quality reports, we looked at a wide variety of sources to kind of get an idea, since we don't live in this beautiful town, what's going on in this beautiful town, to be able to really understand the needs, the history, and where Silverton hopes to go in the future. And so through that needs assessment, we realized that the lagoon is reaching its ending point, that there have been, as Emily mentioned, a few hiccups, and what we need to do in order to get to a place where there aren't bigger hiccups with the lagoon, because the bigger the hiccups, the bigger the problems for sure. And so then the next step was we're really starting to evaluate some of the funding opportunities and looking at what rate options might be, and these kinds of beginning conversations, which led us to Silverton, helping them to fill out what's called a pre-qualification application. And what that is let me go back. The goal of this is to get state revolving loan fund funding that comes down, that helps communities to be able to invest in their water and wastewater infrastructure. And so a lot of new money is coming through that, and Silverton has the potential to gain some of that. And so being able to get all of these steps in alignment in order to get that funding is imperative. And the first step in that is this pre-qualification application. And so John and Gloria submitted that recently. And so after that, yeah, that was a big win. We had a big celebration once we were able to get through that beast. Like, it was really great. And what that does is it lets the state of Colorado know that Silverton is really looking for this funding, and they really need it, and they're really serious about it. And so it provides the opportunity to gather, to get set up for a potential planning grant, as well as getting disadvantaged community status. I know some people kind of shy away from that, but it's a really beneficial status based on a wide variety of metrics that can help with what's called principal loan forgiveness. So this is a very big, broad, very big, deep process and possibility. So what that can look like really just depends on all the rest of the steps. But that's just one of the many parts of the process. And so then the planning grant can help Silverton kind of understand that what does the utility need? So what kind of wastewater system will be beneficial for the city of Silverton? And they'll work with John, and they'll work with some of the other folks that have been working closely with the city of Silverton to really understand the needs and what will be needed in the future, what kind of nitrate phosphorus removal we're going to need in the future, and what that looks like for whether we need what kind of mechanical plant or combination plant that might be needed. So once that planning grant comes through, then there's potential for an engineering grant that can help with the heavy engineering reports that will really help for where to build, how to build, when to build, all of that good stuff in the actual transition to a new wastewater treatment plant. From there, then we talk about what that means, what kind of funding is needed, and then evaluate different funding sources in order to be able to build that treatment plant. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Yes.
What's your proposed timeline for those actions?
That is a great question. That is a great question. So it depends on a lot of different things. We'll start with it.
Question.
She asked what the timeline is for all of these projects. I apologize. I should have done that to begin with. It's a great question because it is fluid, unfortunately. We don't want this to drag out for 5-10 years because the funding is here now and the needs are here now. But it also depends on the state of Colorado because they have to have a meeting in order to have a conversation, and then things can kind of really get rolling. Then it depends on how long it takes to get assessments and engineering reports and planning reports and whatnot. So I hesitate to try to put a time frame on it. Do you two have any thoughts about what kind of timeline you think might be feasible?
I think 3 to 4 years would be feasible. Less than 5.
That's before building.
Oh, that would be the target date for having a new functioning treatment facility. 3 to 4 years.
Yes.
Any new facility going to be?
Say again.
Will any new facility be a covered facility?
A new covered facility. A mechanical plant has a bit more cover to it than just open lagoons. Mhm. She asked if there was a cover to the new system. Yes.
The hiccups, is that, how often does that happen in other locations? Is that just like, it happens because it's mechanical and then it's maybe?
So that your current system, he asked what the hiccups are, how common that is. So your current system is not mechanical, it is a lagoon. An aerated lagoon is what it's called. And as far as how often those hiccups happen, it depends on the community. There is literally no national average or anything along those lines. It depends on so many things as to what causes hiccups in aerated lagoons or even mechanical plants for that matter. So geography, weather, age, usage, all of those things can come into play.
The one thing I would add to that though, is that Silverton's really not alone. A lot of communities, because of when prior funding has been available in the country, are having the exact same issues where we're seeing, roll after roll of communities reaching the end of their infrastructure span and having breaks. So one stat that I talk about sometimes just to draw on is a water main breaks every 2 minutes in the United States, right? And so that's just one example of how, as a country, we've let our infrastructure really age and it's time to do.
You can tell. Go ahead.
Are all lagoons across the country being replaced, or is it just the fact that it's any system after a while needs to be replacing mechanical?
Yes. The short answer is, and it's going to depend. There are some that just put in a new lagoon maybe 10 years ago and they're probably fine, where as far as working goes. But some of the issue that a lot of folks are going to face are these new nutrient removal permits or requirements that may be coming in the next 5 to 7 years. And that's something that is a real issue for a lot of folks who are like, we just built this 10 years ago. It is still perfectly functional. But there are a lot of, you can almost go back through and see how often funding has been injected for wastewater and water treatment by how old the systems are. So you can look at systems that were built in like the early 70s that are still there that have not been replaced yet. And then systems that were put in the 90s. And you can almost find a correlation between that and injections of funding into the wastewater systems. Yeah. And so that's why this conversation is so important right now, because we have another injection. And the hope is to be able to have this conversation. Like, this is not just in every 20, 30 years, we need to have this conversation. It's an ongoing so that we don't get to this place again in the future, right? And thinking about things much more of a larger scale than just a right now scale. Did that answer your question? I don't, we kind of walked around it a little.
So I'm just kind of curious, now we're talking about it.
Yeah.
So generally, would you say a lagoon system is an outdated system, like moving forward for all plants, like are they all shifting to mechanical? Or would they, because it sounds like lagoons just maybe can't keep up with the new regulations coming in place.
If those new regulations come into place, that's going to be a serious concern for a lot of communities, especially small communities who have lagoons.
Michelle, I can comment on that
Oh,
as
yeah.
well. You can get by with a lagoon system, but you will have to put additional treatment on that lagoon train, in the treatment train, in order to remove the nutrients. Because the lagoons do a great job of removing BOD and TS suspended solids, like the normal stuff that we've been treating for since the Clean Water Act in the 70s. But you will have to add something onto those. Now, our lagoon had a 25-year design lifespan. And it was actually, I make a correction that I didn't catch. Our lagoon was put into service, I believe, in 1992. And we started having problems in 2017. So precisely at 25 years. And we've had more increasing problems ever since then. So it doesn't make sense for us to do an add-on system to our lagoon, I don't think. Plus, in relation to another question, whether it being covered or not, some can be covered, some aren't. But typically the footprint of a mechanical plant takes up a lot less space. So we could potentially get a little bit more green space down there as well. So, okay, anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you. We appreciate, yeah, for sure. Yes.
Can the mechanical system handle more kind of higher peaks? It seems like that's part of the problem with what we have right now is the stinky 4th of July.
Uh-huh.
You probably have a detention. We haven't designed, it hasn't been designed yet. But typically with a system that has a lot of flow variation and even daily flow variations, you'll have a pond at the beginning where you can detain wastewater and then you can put it into the plant at slower times during the day. And that's also critical for the bugs to work, for the treatment to work, because the strength of the wastewater is crucial for the treatment. So it treats itself essentially because of the bugs that are involved with the process, but that's getting a little bit too detailed. But yeah, you might have a pond at the beginning and then you pump that into the plant later in the day when you have lower flows.
You can be more sophisticated in the design of your mechanical.
Yeah, and
That's a perfect segue, actually.
yeah, it is when thinking about this side. So that planning grant that we talked about and eventually the engineering process would help with determining the size, the capacity, what kind of detention that you might need to look at. A lot of communities like Silverton that have these peaks in the summer or in the winter, depending on when their seasons are for tourism and whatnot, consider those things in depth in order to make sure that you have the capacity to be able to handle that increased amount during those summer months, but then not be too big to handle the normal amounts during the rest of the season. And that's part of what this, what the planning and the design and development process would be. And so it's looking at community engagements, looking at community development programs. It's all of these kinds of things to understand what's needed for that wastewater treatment system. And so also considering, again, those future potential limits. We can't predict the future, but we can get some kind of eyes and ears to say, this is what seems to be coming down the pike, what we need to be aware of. And then as soon as we get that figured out, then there's going to be something else, I'm sure, but at least we can kind of figure out what's coming in the near future in order to understand what's best for our health, right? And so then we also, through this, once we are able to figure out the size and the needs for the wastewater treatment plant, then we can figure out how much that's going to cost. So if we're doing a full, huge, massive mechanical wastewater treatment plant that's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars, it's not. Don't panic. Don't panic.
Scratch last.
Yes. Then you can figure out how much money you need to get in grants and loans and all of those things and what that might mean for your rate structures. Next slide, please. So the goal is to find the most cost-effective, feasible plan for funding the project, whatever it may be, whatever kind of size or treatment plant might be needed. And it's often going to be a combination of sources. So USDA has already worked with Silverton a little bit. They may be a very ideal place to get some funding for this. Community development block grants, other grant sources, as well as federal funding from the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, which comes through the state of Colorado. So kind of pulling these things together in order to fund it in the best way with the least financial burden on the community. Next slide, please. And that's where we start talking about rates.
So Michelle's exactly right. We want to braid a lot of different funding sources together to get this done. We don't know what it's going to cost at present because we haven't done those studies. But we can say with fair amount of certainty that in addition to federal, state, and other funding, the community is also going to have to chip in a little bit, especially to operate and maintain the system over its lifespan once it's built. So that leads us into a conversation about rates, right? And when you think about rates, I always think about like two goals, right? The first goal is you want your utility to have enough money that it's doing its job, operating well, maintaining properly so that you're avoiding expensive repairs. The second goal is you want rates that are affordable for folks. And customers aren't a monolith. Affordability is going to mean different things to different people. The reason that this conversation has an extra nuance here in Silverton is because the demand that's put on your fixed infrastructure comes a lot from your summer tourists, comes a lot from part-time residents and part-time businesses. We have full-timers who have to pay year-round for these things. So next slide. One of the things that we just want to put on the radar now to think about as you start to mull your options and think about rate design and how to meet those two goals of having a really well-run proactive utility and affordable rate is how are you going to do this? How are you going to figure out how to charge customers in a way that's fair, in a way that reflects where the costs to your system are coming from, right? So a lot of places use, the amount of water you use and they calculate based on that. But the truth is that how much water you use, that isn't really that correlated. It doesn't really have that strong of a relationship with where your costs are coming from. I know here in Silverton, you fees, right? And you have fees that you give to all customers, try to keep it fair. And that seems straightforward, but it's not sophisticated enough to prevent some of the burden that's placed on your full-timers. So what do we do, right? One option that might be worth considering as you go through this process is thinking about, well, what is it about the customers and the users of the water system is variable and is really strongly correlated to your cost drivers. So for example, there are property characteristics that can actually predict the amount of demand that property is going to have on your wastewater treatment infrastructure needs, right? And so if you could figure out, all right, well, room size makes sense. The more rooms you have, the more bathrooms you have, the more demand on your wastewater systems that are going to be. You can think about property characteristics like that, but there are also many others that you would want to look at and say, does this meet our goals, our twin goals of getting our revenue where it needs to be and protecting those who are most vulnerable to rate shocks? And my organization, US Water Alliance, has done some research on this. If anyone wants to look into this, Gloria's got this PowerPoint, QR codes in here. You can read up on it. But I think for me, it's important to know at the onset of this project that you do have options, right? You do have options. There can be nuance in how you do this. And you're going to want to have conversations with the community about what you want to do. Y'all with me? That make any sense? I want to pause here and just see if anyone has any questions about that. I love it. That means hopefully I did a good job. Otherwise, this went way over everybody's heads, for which I'm sorry for speaking Mandarin. But that's great. We can go to the next slide. Yes, so we're here in Silverton to hear from you. We wanted to take this first opportunity, even though it's early days, to put the project on everybody's radar. We spent some time at the Coffee Bear this morning. We're going to be at Elevated Coffee Company tomorrow morning, just chatting with folks. What's on your radar concerning wastewater? What are your priorities in terms of where we take this project? What are your concerns? What are your dreams for this community? Because we know that infrastructure underlines all those other goals that you're trying to hit. So You can come see us tomorrow if you haven't already seen us today. Or you can take some extra time after this meeting to go throw your thoughts up on these boards behind me. And I hope to hear from you. So I think the next slide is just asking for questions, and the one after that has Michelle and mine contact information, but happy to hear any other questions or cede the floor back over to Gloria.
What happens to the old lagoon?
It would be decommissioned. So,
And yes, and it may be repurposed. I don't want to get into that too deeply, but it could be used for recreation. It could be used for augmentation, which is an important one for us because our water rights are very junior. And there are some water users down in the valley in Durango, particularly a couple of ditch companies that have senior water rights. So as we're moving into more drought years, if they put a call on our water rights, then we have to have some type of augmentation water, or legally, we would have to stop using water legally. Okay. Practically, that's probably not going to happen, but it might cost a lot of money to continue to leave those faucets running. It might cost the town money and all of us. So if we had a valve, pond down there with a valve on it, we could just open that valve and that would be our augmentation water or a source of augmentation. So that's one way we could use it, but it also could be used for recreation or park space, green space, whatever, it may be.
Do you have any other communities in Colorado that you're working with that you can point to as a success that has worked like this, or anywhere else outside of Colorado?
I don't know if I'd say a bunch. We're working with a lot of communities that are at various points of this process. My team has worked on kind of these types of projects with communities for a long time, even before this new injection of funding has come. And there have been some successes. There was one success out in rural Kansas, western rural Kansas. Thank you. That was able to upgrade to a combination system of the lagoon and mechanical. So it was kind of similar to what John was talking about, with kind of augmenting the system that they already had. So they did some repair work to the lagoon and did some added a mechanical feature that helped with some of the nitrates that we were dealing with, because we are heavily agriculture. And so our phosphorus and nitrogen are in some communities through the roof. And so there has been some success. The treatment plant should be up and going by the end of spring of next year. They're in the process of building that. So it was we didn't walk near as closely with that community as we have with Silverton. That was a little bit more specialized technical assistance for very specific kind of things. So a lot of data pulling. So it was good for that one. But fingers crossed that it's really they're on the IUP. They're running the IUP is the incentive plan. And it's something that you get on in order to get the state revolving loan fund. And so they're on there. So hopefully they'll get some more funding to really continue to advance that up.
I think that I heard you say you're leveraging Silverton's data for the advantage to communities to compress the extra funding for this process. Is there something available for communities like us moving forward to maintain a new facility?
So let me clarify, it doesn't provide with extra funding. Okay. What it can help to do is to give you some principal loan forgiveness on any of the loans that you might take from the Clean Water State Revolving Loans Fund. And USDA also has some principal loan forgiveness as well. So basically what that does is that, okay, you're doing a good job, you have all your ducks in a row, but you are at a disadvantage for one reason or another. So you're not going to have to pay back all of this. There'll be some percentage, it'll be based on a formula that will allow Silverton to not have to pay, that could potentially allow Silverton to not have to pay an entire loan back. And so that's where the disadvantage status can come into benefit. As far as the second part of your question, there's very little funding out there for operations and maintenance. So you can get it built, but you have to take care of it. So it's kind of that will help lay the foundation, but then the community has to be able to continue it. And that's where that, what we call technical, managerial, and financial capacity comes into play in order to get those loans, because the government's not going to give you a few $1 million if you're not going to be able to take care of the thing that you're building it with, is what they're saying.
So what is the maximum percentage that you all have seen for general historically and disadvantage?
I personally have not seen any yet. Have you?
So I know that there are some states, and it varies state to state, will give up to 75% in principal forgiveness, and the community only has to pay back 25% of the loan. It's not common, but the disadvantaged status that Silverton's applying for definitely puts you on that path.
I did do some with another community in Kansas that was able to achieve that disadvantage status. And through USDA, was able to get the remainder of their loan forgiven, which was about 18% of their principal. It was almost paid off. A variety of things happened to make it where they were not going to be able to pay it off because they needed more money to service their water treatment infrastructure. And so they were able to get loan principal forgiveness to pay off that USDA loan in order to get a new loan to pay for the next. So there are benefits to being able to get where you need to be by having that.
I think USDA will do up to 80%. I'm not mistaken.
And you should introduce yourself.
You
Oh,
should, yeah.
I'm Scott Thomas, Colorado Rural Water Association circuit rider, so I see it all.
Josiah here, he is part of Colorado Rural Water, so we've been a pilot project. Our intense hand-holding with Silverton will start to ebb at the end of September, and Josiah and his team will be working with Gloria and John a bit too. So you'll have the chance to hear from Josiah. We're not going away, but get rid of us that easily. But the side-by-side work will transition a little bit more over to Colorado Rural Water in October. So, yes, sir.
I have two questions. I know it's real early in the process, but do we have a range of estimates for what an implant will cost?
Not really.
It's
There was one at Edgemont Ranch down in Durango. And I think it came in around 12 or 13 million. And it's a similar population size, except it's not. Because they have around 600 residents, but sometimes we have 5,000 people here. So we could be quite a bit different than that. But we're talking about a substantial amount of money for this community, no doubt.
Okay, and my other question, if we switch to a mechanical type plant, is the operational cost of running that higher than the users to that?
Yeah.
So by what?
Yes, well, we would probably have to hire someone with certification to run it. Because even if I had that certification or someone else on our staff had that certification, it would be more or less a full-time job to run. So I wouldn't have time to do that. And, maybe someone else can be the public works director. If you're looking for a job, I can run the wastewater plant. But yeah, operational costs will go up. We may need to hire 2 people. And the cost of the energy consumption, I really couldn't comment on that at this point. But we use a lot of energy down there right now to run our blowers. So.
And some of that energy efficiency can be built into, so there's new energy efficiency emerging within wastewater treatment, especially with mechanical plants as well. And that's something that can be explored thoroughly through that planning grant as well, to evaluate the energy uses as well. Because sometimes it may cost a little bit more to get that more energy efficiency upfront. But it would make sense over the long run as to how much it would cost to run the center from an energy standpoint. So
the disadvantage qualification, is that a one-time thing, or we have to stay within that category for the life of the loan?
not for the life of the loan, it would be for the initial part of the loan. But if you want to apply for an extension, you would probably have to get that status again. And I'm not as up on the Colorado State revolving fund specifications on those as I'd like to be, as I should be for having this conversation, and focused on 4 very specific states, and that takes a lot of different marketing. But there are, do you know how long that lasts, the disadvantaged status?
I think it's year to year.
Is it year to year?
Yeah, they don't describe it on the IUP.
Yeah.
Once the funding is dispersed,
that's a done deal.
Yeah.
I think the community status can change.
Yeah.
One of the fundamental characteristics is where are you in relation to the state median household income? So if you're below it, that's a big factor, you being a disadvantage. Above it,
One of the challenges with Silverton is because looking at the metrics for what gives you the definition of community status is population and median household income. And depending on who owns property here can really have an influx on what your median household income looks like, because it's based off of the American Community Survey, which is it's a good tool to get a snapshot picture, but it doesn't always tell the whole picture. So the community that I mentioned before that we got their principal loan forgiveness on, we were able to dig in down to census tract and actual resident status of the people who lived in the community to maintain their disadvantaged community status for that loan forgiveness. So there are ways to make sure, because one of the concerns that has been is because you do have folks who have second homes and things like that here who do not represent the town of Silverton as well. As of right now, the data that you have, you do qualify as disadvantaged community status. And so as we go through this process, and the idea of that changing anytime within those next 3 to 4 years that John said is slim. It's not impossible, but slim. So hopefully, and then once that's determined after there's this meeting with Colorado, then that will be there because this process has started. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and you know, if we as a town are to raise our median income with people who do live year round, you know, that to disqualify us for this status in 5 years, it's a tricky place to be. It's like we want to make more money, but it's going to take some status.
Yeah, and that is a challenge that a lot of communities, just like Silverton face, that have a large tourist population where people have second homes, and so that often is considered people who want to retire here. Those types of things can have an impact, but there can be in other states anyway. There are other ways that you can designate as a disadvantaged community by using other variables in addition to median household income. But yeah, the income is up here, but there's only this many permanent residents. Here's how that breaks down to really show the actual median household income of the community. So remoteness is also sometimes a possibility. And we all have that. It takes a while to get here. It's a lovely way to get here, but it takes a while.
I do have one question from the World Water guys. And maybe John too as well. You guys noticed that both Durango and Ray are getting brand new sewer plants. Durango's online. You're right in the middle of the project. As compared to what are those plants from? Ray might be somewhat community to us because of the increase in population of speed level. We have different impacts. Very much. There's a bigger community by far. Does anybody know the cost on your rate plan?
No, and
I don't.
no, but I recall that Durango was like 50 million, but it's not, that's apples and oranges. But that's actually on my list, Larry. Thank you for reminding me.
That's it, you bring up the Edgemont plant. Kind of a similar, that's a stable population.
Yeah.
A transient population. It goes in and out, and we may stabilize and become a little more year-round level, but who knows what the potential of this build out in this town is. There's people who want to build sky high buildings, whatever. Just to point out, I worked at the public schools for nearly 23 years. John kind of came in right behind me. I went to work a month after this current plant went on. And it was, the lagoon system, like John it out. Doesn't do the treatment, just needs to be happening in the future with requirements. It's just settle it out, let it settle out, and, you know. Hopefully the effluent, what goes out, or the alcohol is fine, efficient, and free, right? Anyway, so it's gonna be a mechanical plant that goes in here, count on that. You know, maybe a hybrid of some sort, certainly mechanical involvement. You know, dealing with reduction of the THCs, you know, and you know, the toxicity is what we're looking at. What our inflow is excellent. What we get put into town is excellent. If there's any industries that arise here, we had some people that were dying wool and making products here. Whenever they did their dye process, it hit our plant hard. As a mission of monetary impact, you know, they would do it like 3 or 4 times a year. And the other thing that's happening here, it's not just the local population, the population that's not trained. We're taking effluent from the Forest Service toilets, Gillette toilets, Mola Lake, all those other things are coming down here at the same time. Like this local population. So there's, you know, quite a bit to deal with, and we're doing system. It was obsolete when it was installed.
Well, we'll be around, as Emily mentioned, we'll be around tomorrow at Elemental, thank you. Elevated.
Elevated coffee.
Sorry, there's so many little coffee. And please feel free to step down, put your thoughts up here and chat with us over here.
Thank you all for your participation. Yeah, did you want one more?
18.5 billion. Just looked it up.
Oh.
Great.
That was your.
All right.
Okay.
As you can see, this is going to be a community-wide effort moving forward. And we have another community-wide effort going on as well, which is our upcoming code rewrite. And so I wanted to introduce community planning strategies here. If you haven't seen them yet, they are contracted planners. And they are going to talk about our upcoming code rewrite. I don't know why this is here.
Sheila, did you want to take it away? I will.
Excellent.
So I'm Sheila Booth. I'm with Community Planning Strategies. We have PJ DeLuba and Chris Macer over there. We are the contracted planning department. We're here to help your staff through everything land use planning and development. So next slide. I already went through this, but our name is Community Planning Strategy. So if you ever need anything, we'll be here to help you, hopefully. Next slide. So in tonight's agenda, what we're going to talk about, we introduced ourselves, but we're going to talk about the development readiness assessment, the code update, and the special projects. Next slide. So development readiness assessment. Next slide, please. So you guys went through your master plan update, and after you do a master plan update, the next thing you usually do is update your code because you want your rules and regulations to help you get to where you're going. So part of that is a development readiness assessment where you look at your code to see how many things are currently there that can get you there to where you want to be and things that need to change. So your land use regulations include annexation, zoning regulations, subdivision regulations, building regulations, and then you have development standards and specifications, and then your architectural design standards. Next slide. So what is a development readiness assessment, which is what we did after the master plan was adopted? We review, compare, and assess regulations, standards, and requirements. We want to make sure that they're all compatible. And then we want to make sure that they align to meet the development pressures that are now and the ones that we see coming in the future. And then we want to look at them in focusing on the areas that are left for development, because that's where most of your attention is going to be going over the next few years. And then we come up with a statement of the town's readiness to facilitate this development readiness development request. So what do we look at? We look at your municipal code, development standards, existing infrastructure. The Compass Master Plan was a big part of it. And then your community values and policies. Next slide. So the background in 2022, the assessment started in August. We met with staff, the Planning Commission, and the board to establish goals, objectives, and a timeline. And then the review concluded in late 2022. This year, we drafted the report in 23, presented to the staff Planning Commission and Board. And the conclusion was you need to hire a firm to update your land development code. And the firm was selected August 14th. And so you'll be meeting some representatives from that firm later tonight during this presentation. Next slide. So the general findings of the readiness assessment, you need to remove some specific fees. So you have a land development code. The goal of having your land use regulations is to make it consistent for anyone who's going through the process. You want to make it fair and you want to make it predictable. So it doesn't mean if you're a citizen off the road or you're a developer who has been doing this for years. If you come in and see this code, we want it to be consistent and fair and predictable for everyone, regardless of your level of going through the development process. So the general findings, fees, there were fees that were specific in the code. You don't want that. You want to have a fee schedule that your council or your board or your planning commission, whoever is adopting these fees or setting these fees, they can update and you just reference it back without having to update your code. You want to consider increasing the bond from 100% to anywhere between 100 and 200%. What a bond is when someone comes in to develop a subdivision, they put up collateral to ensure that all of those improvements get done so that if they walk away, the town can call on that collateral to then go in and finish that subdivision. So 100% is great, but what happens with inflation? Then you don't have enough. So that's why you want to look at that range of 100 to 200%. Update the code to allow digital submittals and communication procedures. We're in a digital society now. Everything comes to us through email, PDFs. Very rarely do you get those large paper copies that you're flipping over and doing red lines on anymore. So getting the digital copies, it makes it easy for everyone to see and get them as quickly as possible. Adding graphics to clearly demonstrate information. What is a pylon sign? It's easier to see it than it is to define it in words. So having those graphics are really helpful in your code. Reference specific public works construction standards to ensure compliance. So when someone's reading through the code and there's a standard, you reference the document that they need to go to. Rename supplemental design document. So there was some confusion with the language that's in the code and the actual document that has design standards in it. Next slide. Structure and organization. This is key. So when you're looking through your code, you want to be able to go to one section to find the same information. So if you have, for instance, non-conforming uses in 5 areas of your code, somebody has to come in and know to look in 5 areas. But if you have it in one section, it's all there for someone to find. So structure and organization is very key in a code, and land development codes are full of a lot of jargon. So making sure you can keep all of that together is key. And code can be very dry. Now, TJ is a code nerd. So
Yes, love it.
ever want to have questions, conversations about land use? No. So you want to create one chapter for all your land development regulations, general provisions, zoning regulations, planned unit developments, all of those areas there. We also want to update and verify all references to statutes, state standards, ordinances. All of those are the same because as things change over time, your references become outdated. So updating your code, you want to update those references. Move technical information to a separate engineering standard. So instead of having that specifically in your code, have a standard over here that can be updated as time goes on, rather than having to go back through and re-adopt your land development code. Consolidate non-conforming use and structure. Again, that was the conversation I had at the beginning, making sure it's all in one area so anyone who comes in can find it. And then move all your building construction requirements to the building regulations. Take them out of the zoning, put them in the building regulations. Next slide. Process and procedures. Again, making sure it's clear. We want clear interpretations. We want consistent interpretations. So we want to define application types and develop a clear application submittal, review, and approval procedure. So when you come in, you know up front, I'm going to have to do X, Y, and Z to get through the process. And it's going to be the same for you as it is your neighbor or anyone else specific to your application types. A site plan review application process. A lot of times these are used for your commercial developments because there's more to look at in your commercial development than there is for a single family home. So with commercial developments, you're looking at parking, you're looking at impacts. Single family residential, it's a simple little house with 1 parking space, 2 parking spaces, garages. So a site plan gives your staff a chance to look at those things that have more impact than like a single family residence. And then allow expedited review for affordable housing projects and projects proposing renewable energy. Next. Consider amending the approval process to avoid duplicate or inconsistent information. So review timelines, process flow charts, review user-friendly tables. This is really a way for us to put it into the code where you can go in and identify what the process is going to be, how long it's going to take, know who's going to be reviewing your application. Is it just going to be staff? Is it going to be planning commission and staff? Is it going to go all the way through to board of trustees? So really making sure everyone understands what those requirements are. Next. Schedule of uses. So uses are uses. Single family, retail, indoor recreation, outdoor recreation, public facilities. Putting those all on a table and then grouping them by the type of use. So residential uses all together, commercial uses all together, industrial uses. So when you go in to find a use, I want to build a brewery. You're going to go into the retail section and be able to find it rather than just having to scan 500 different uses so you can have them grouped together. We want to make sure that all of the uses really do belong in the zone district that they're currently in or new zone districts that are being created. You want to consider adding administrative and planning commission approval. Sometimes uses are simple, sometimes approvals are simple, and taking someone all the way through a public hearing process can be a bit onerous. So maybe it's something that the town should consider is giving more authority to your staff or your planning commission. A duplex use, two family, putting that as a use by right into your single family. This is another way you can help address some of the affordability issues in town. And then remove educational and religious establishments as uses subject to special review. This is a legal consideration, so something you just need to do, period. Next slide. Zoning districts. The top one is in line with the Compass Master Plan to consolidate the residential zone districts to meet the community vision. So more density, the smaller lots, consolidating lots, keeping the lots separate, looking at how we can do infill with what you have and create those affordable housing within the town. And using the existing open areas, undeveloped spaces within your town. A table of dimensional standards. So dimensional standards are your front, side, and rear setback, height, floor area ratio, if you have those things. Reducing setbacks in downtown and infill areas where density is desired. It also helps with keeping in the character of your downtown. If everything's pushed up to the front, then you want to keep everything pushed up. You don't want to have houses that are 20 feet back when everything else is right on the front property line. So really looking at what the existing setbacks are, what the form in your town is, and keeping that and make sure it's reflected in your code. And then modify or expand design standards such as additional snow storage, exterior lighting, parking, and landscaping. Next. More zoning district and standards. Review the overlay districts. So currently you have a limited review overlay, a steep slope overlay, an avalanche hazard overlay, and a floodplain overlay. So really looking at getting rid of those and addressing them in a different way. So limited review overlay was used to look at uses that have more impact. So let's say an industrial use. If you have an industrial use, sometimes you're worried about heat, glare, noise, smell. So instead of just creating an overlay, you're going to look at those uses through a special use review, which goes through your planning commission and your board of trustees, and they have to address those as part of getting that use approved rather than just doing the overlay. Steep slope overlay, change that to part of the review procedures whenever someone's coming in. They have to provide a slope analysis. You have to look to see if there's steep slope. Is there downslope creep? Is there anything involved with it? So instead of doing it as an overlay, you're looking at it as they come in with their development. And they're providing the studies to prove whether or not it's impacting. Same with the avalanche hazard overlay. Instead of having that, have the developer provide an engineer documentation showing if it is or is not within the hazard area. And then if it is, how they're going to meet the structural requirements. So that's the same with the floodplain. Again, have the engineer determine if it is, and if it is, how they're going to meet those structural requirements. Take it out of the overlay. Next. Again, we have the slopes. So strengthen the standards for disturbance to slopes 25% or greater. Consider maximum percentage of steep slopes that can be disturbed. So if you're over 25%, Do we want to allow them to disturb it? Do we want to allow building in that area? Because it does have an effect of upslope and downslope to other citizens, residents, and developments. Consolidate the avalanche hazard blue and red zones. Establish submittal requirements requiring survey documenting of those on-site hazards. This goes back to getting rid of those overlay zones, really having that documented at the time of development. Clear standards for development impacting steep slopes and other hazards, and continue discussions to establish regulations addressing wetlands. So as we talked about earlier, we had a hold on development regarding the wetlands until January, until we can get that inventory of what they are, and then hopefully create some kind of program to help with the mitigation to protect those wetlands. And then consider renaming use by special review to a conditional use application, just to kind of help through that understanding process. Next slide. Update the sign regulations for compliance with recent case law, Reed versus Gilbert. The basis of this is if you have to read a sign to regulate it, it's unconstitutional. So you can't regulate it based on content. You can only regulate it based on type. A pylon sign, great. Political sign, no. You have to read it to determine it's political, therefore you can't regulate it. So a lot of places, they don't want signs in the right of way, but they would allow political signs. Well, now you can't do it. You either allow all signs in the right of way or no signs in the right of way. Possibly create separate articles for some of the supplemental zoning, such as non-conforming uses and structures. Update your site design standards to ensure they meet the desired character of the town. And again, this goes back to the Compass Master Plan. What is it that you're envisioning? Let's make sure the code goes back and does that. Clarify standards for mobile homes, mobile home parks, campers parks, and all of those. There are some issues with lot sizes for larger groupings of mobile homes and campers. So we just want to make sure that it's clear when you're coming in, if you can or cannot do what you want to do. And then the CMRS, or the telecommunications information, we want to update that to make sure it's meeting current regulations as well. Next slide. Finally, a new topic, mapping. Update and actively manage the town's digital mapping data. So as part of the process, bringing in the zoning, updating that information, all the infrastructure of the streets, so that you have a digital map that when you go on your website, hopefully eventually, you can pull up the information and see, oh, what is my property zone? Where is the nearest water line or water main? You might be able to actually see that on your website as part of mapping updates. Publish the digital data online and then just continually update it, because what good is having an online map if it's 10 years out of date? So making sure that we keep all that information out there for you, but also keeping it up to date. Next. Planned unit developments. Who knows what a planned unit development is? Okay.
Wonder does.
Of course he does.
Nerd.
An easy way to say it is kind of an exception to the rule. So if somebody comes in with a concept that doesn't meet your standard zoning districts, they can ask to be zoned planned unit development. And then they take your R1, let's say your residential zone district, and then they tweak it to meet their needs. This is usually for areas that have topography issues, areas or uses that are not identified in your code, something that's new. Let's take a brewery, for instance. Years ago, breweries were over in your industrial areas because they were just that type of use. But now they've been mixed with a brewery that has a restaurant, that has a bar. So now that use is now in your downtown areas. Whereas before, they would have to do a planned unit development to bring it in. So planned unit developments are a negotiation tool by a developer between the town so that the town can get certain things back from them to allow it. And then the developer can also get the use or the development that fits that property. So the town gets something out of it. You might get extra amenities. Those are the kind of things you can ask for with planned unit development. So it is a benefit to the town because it gives the town the ability to bring in those uses that they haven't really thought of, or to help them develop those areas like maybe Shrine Hill that have a lot of unique considerations that need to be built in that a standard zone district just won't fit. So there would be providing this new section, provide application review process, continue discussions with ways to increase the public benefit, which is dedications, impact fees, fees in lieu, and then a clear application process. You have major and minor PUDs, but that goes beyond what I just told you. So just trust me, there's major and minor. Next. Subdivision regulations. So subdivision is when you take a parcel of land and you divide it. If you divide it outside the subdivision process, it's not legal, and therefore most places won't even give you a building permit. But if you go through the subdivision process, you create a legal lot, and that's when you can start to build. So we want to evaluate dedications, impact fees, or fees in lieu, because at the time of subdivision is when the town can extract those. So school dedications or school fees, park dedications and park fees, those type of concessions or impacts happen at the time of subdivision, and that's when your town can get those fees in place. That's when you also look at your public improvements. That was the subdivision bond I was talking about earlier, with them coming into with the 100% to 200%. And then evaluate your design standards for your subdivision. That typically is like, how long does a street need to be? How long, what's the maximum length? I always like to say, in towns I've worked with, the maximum block length is the length of the fire hose. And I was told when I first started planning, fire trucks don't have reverse. I believed it. Now I know better. It's just the length of the fire hose. That's how far it is for them to get this. So that's how they standardize typically your block length. Next. The level of approval. This is where I went back to. Typically, most of your items are going through staff, coming into staff first. Staff reviews it. After it's reviewed and we feel like it's at a point where it should go to planning commission, it goes to planning commission. The reason staff reviews it and gets it to that point is because we want your planning commission and your board of trustees eventually to see the finished product. We don't want them seeing something that's, well, they're going to move this street and they're going to move that, so they don't get their picture. So your staff works with them to get them to the point of their application where it's ready to be seen. It meets the criteria, it meets the regulations. Then the planning commission looks at it and says, well, we see that it meets these criteria, but we'd like to see a few other things. They negotiate. Then it goes to your board of trustees, who may do the same thing. And then it goes through the approval process. So your level of approval is basically that process. And you might think, like I said earlier, you might consider adding an administrative level. If you're just moving a lot line over 5 feet, does that really need to go through a full public hearing process of 6 weeks if it's having no impact except to be moved over? So those are the kind of considerations we'd like the town to look at as part of the code update. Let's go to the next one. Definitions. I always tell people start at definitions, because definitions tell you if you're looking at the right thing. So if you think, I want to do indoor recreation, and then you go to the definition and you see indoor recreation does not include a massage facility, then you know you're looking at the wrong definition, and then you go try to find the next one. So you want to ensure in your code that everything has a definition. So I never have to go, well, what is a front lot line? Where is your front lot line? You can go to see a front lot line is this, and then it will reference where you can get a picture of it to see how it's measured. What's a corner lot? What's building height? How is building height measured? So the standard, the definition is there, but then it can reference where you can go to get more information on it. So you want to make sure everything is defined so that no one has to come back later and say, well, I thought it meant this, or I thought it meant that. And then you don't have a clear picture. We don't have a clear picture. And somebody might be getting mixed messages on what things are. Identify additional terms that might be needed, and then add or further define words and terms. Next, I don't know why I keep looking at you as a code geek.
I'm just having a good time over here. So
I'm sure you are. Recommended implementation. So structure and format, combined provisions. These are the sections that were recommended for the structure for the articles. Next slide. Process, clarify the submittal process. Make sure that everything has a submittal checklist. So you know exactly what you have to turn in. Staff knows what the review criteria are to make sure that you do meet those standards, and then what that approval process is, as in who is the final approving body for that application. A schedule of uses, again, making sure that all the uses are defined, that they fit within the various zoning districts within the town. And then your use standards, expand the supplemental standards to evaluate organization so that we have that list of uses that is easier for everyone to navigate. Next. Overlay districts, we're going to look at re-envisioning those. Signs we're updating to reflect the changes, and then the references and definitions, again, making sure everything is defined and that one definition is provided so that you understand what it is. Graphics, I think graphics are key. So you have a visual representation to provide clarity. So one example is building height. Is it at the finished grade? Is it at the base of the structure? Having a graphic showing how we define building height is always helpful. Next. So next, not only did we do the code analysis, we did a Shrine Hill constraints analysis. So as you all know, Shrine Hill, and I am turned around, is it that way? Yeah, it's that way. Is one of the largest chunks of land that is still undeveloped, but it has a lot of issues. So what did we learn during the analysis? Next slide, please. It was first the background, provide the first step for creating a sub-area plan for the Shrine Hill area. So this was a recommendation from the master plan to demonstrate feasibility of a development pattern. If you look at the platted layout, it is just a bunch of rectangles on that land, and it is not feasible at all the way it is currently designed. So what could be done? What we looked at were the general overview of what this document provides is a general overview and images. And we looked at the existing conditions, roads, utilities, property ownership, zoning, and then the hazards. Next slide. So opportunities for future development, the roadway design. SGM was contracted to look, and they designed proposed road alignments and associated improvements. They utilized the proposed grades on these plans to identify potential future road alignments and associated improvements. The zoning, the majority of that land is residentially zoned, only a small portion is public, and that's the Memorial Park. And with these zoning classifications, there are opportunities available to meet the demands and reduce impact. Next slide. So access, there are multiple locations where connections can be made. The current roadway bisects multiple properties. The simplest connections require accessing the land within the county though. So direct connections to the road network are possible, but additional access points should be made. So again, the way it was currently laid out, someone just drew a map, threw it on the property without really looking at where the slopes are. Can you get up a 20% road? You could, but not really. Next. Property ownership, that's one of the biggest constraints over there. Contains parcels owned by 165 different owners, and only 9 parcels are owned by the town. So you can imagine putting all of that together to try to come up with a plan might be a little difficult. The public improvements. If you were to install roads and utilities to the standard, you would require retaining walls, and that would impact the private properties and adjacent properties as well. Next. Steep slopes, development again, they just laid it on there. So development is proposed on areas exceeding 25%. And if you go up there to try to build, you're going to have increased project costs because of the accessibility and the maintenance, and then the steep slopes. So there was a lot of information going into the steep slope area because if you look up there, it's steep. Keep going. Next slide, please. Utilities, there's no existing water and sanitary throughout much of the area, and that would have to be built. And that would cost additional design and engineering due to the steep slopes. So a build out study is currently being performed and will determine those existing capacities. So the issue is you're going to have to be extending water and sewer and roads, a lot of infrastructure over in that area, and it's not going to be cheap. There are avalanche hazard areas, and much of it is impacted by that. Next slide. Wetlands. So there are valuable wetlands in the town. Some are delineated in state inventory, some aren't. But as you know, the town has put out the RFP to have the wetland inventory done, and that will help with the Shrine Hill analysis or future plans as well. And in the floodplain, you have 2 streams in town. Both of them cause the 100 and 500 year that you would have to look into as part of that development. Next. Access. So there's the 8th Street and Snowden connection. There's the 8th Street connection to County Road 6, the County Road 6 at 15th, and the 10th Street connection. So all of them have issues. Some of them are better than other, but there is the ability to get connectivity up there. It's just There's going to be engineering and costs associated with it. Next. So the conclusion, on the bright side, multiple options for creating connections. On the downside, given the topography, the cost of plan, design, and construction will be significantly higher based on those things. Other considerations are going to, of course, be the wildfire risk and visual impacts to the citizens here. Next. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over. Actually, I'm going to go into the next slide. So this is where we're going to turn it over to your new consultant, Clarion. So Clarion was selected. Oh, it was posted on XX. I love that. Clarion was accepted and was appointed or chosen by the Board of Trustees on August 14th to be the consulting firm to lead the code update. So the development readiness assessment really just looked at the code to see, was it okay? Did you need just a small overhaul or a large overhaul? It was determined it was a large overhaul. So the RFP went out, and Clarion and Associates, they're a national land use consulting firm out of Denver and Chapel Hills, and Elizabeth Garvin is the lead on the project. So Elizabeth will be joining us now. And if you'll go to the next slide, she can do her introduction.
Thanks.
Oh,
I think our slides didn't get added. That's
yeah,
cool.
this is the wrong slide deck. Do you have another one?
Do I?
Project. Can you hold on just a minute?
Sure.
Is it in the?
The big from them directly to you guys. Well, do you want to talk for a minute, Elizabeth, and give a brief introduction while we pull this up?
Sure. I could also share screen if that'd be easier.
Yeah.
Nope. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Garvin. I'm a director at Clarion Associates. We're in Denver. I'm a land use planner and attorney, and unlike CPS, we just write zoning codes all day, every day. So we don't have the additional fun of doing plans review and helping on projects like they do, but we do have the great fun of meeting and working with wonderful communities across our state and across the country. I'm here this evening with my colleague, Gabby Hart. Gabby's a senior associate here at Clarion, and she and Brody Smith and I will be working on this project. You will see the three of us coming and going over the next about a year and a half. So we wanted to talk about a few things tonight as they're getting the slides up. First of all, the project RFP was posted on June 13th and it closed July 13th. The town received 2 proposals and the board selected Clarion on August 14th. So we are really just getting going. We're super excited to be included in the community meeting tonight. And we hope to let you know how we're going to get started, and then we can kind of dive into the project. So every time we start a land use code, we start with some initial goals for the project. So in Silverton, our initial update goals will be, until we meet with the community and revise these, to implement the Compass Master Plan. As Sheila was saying earlier, the land use regulations should be designed to work hand in hand with the master plan to implement the community's goals. So we'll be working with the master plan, with the development readiness assessment, and the existing regulations to see what changes need to be made to move the town code forward. Our second goal is to create a functional land use code that's specific to Silverton. So we want to make sure that you have all the pieces that you need to address development changes now and moving forward. We want to make sure that you're in a legally secure place, as Sheila was pointing out, with the sign code regulations and the religious institution regulations. And we want to make sure that you have all the procedures that you need to function over time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Should I do that?
Can you share your screen?
I can. Hang on one sec. I am almost there. Okay, so let's try this. How's that? Can you see the presentation?
Perfect.
Thank you. All right, so just backing up a second. Turn this thing off. Oops. Okay. Okay. Went through this RFP process. So it was, the project was put out to bid locally and nationally. And so we are super excited to have been accepted. We're also working with, and we have another team member, Urban Rural Continuum, and that they are located in Hotchkiss. And our lead member from URC is Shay Coburn. So she'll be part of our team, and you'll be seeing her at some of our meetings also. Okay, so we just started in with the initial update goals, implementing the plan, creating a functional land use code. Second part of this that is specific to Silverton. The community needs a code written for the community. And our job is going to be to spend time with you, to listen to your concerns and to understand where you are and where you want to go so that you end up with that set of development regulations. We want to address existing issues. So we want to understand what got you to the place of needing a new code. And we also want to think about the future. Most land use codes are in place for 25 to 30 years. I have to say many land use codes are in place longer than that. Gabby and I have the extra fun of working on a number of disco era codes right now. So we remember what the 70s were like and we move forward. And so we'll pick up your code where it is. We'll share what we can do. We'll listen to what the community wants to do, and we'll make those changes. You may wonder who gets involved in writing a land use code. And so we try to do as much outreach as possible within the community. We want to write your code, as we said. And so the more we hear from you, the more we're able to target the working pieces of the code to the things that'll work in Silverton. So we provide opportunities for the community, current residents and businesses to get involved in multiple places in the project. A high level, talk to us about what you want to see. Detailed level, we will share our drafts in different stages with you so everyone can read all of the words we're writing and comment on them. We like to work with local groups and organizations, big and small. We know that people have issues that are important to them that they want to see reflected in the code. In some communities, we work on issues like sustainability. In some communities, we work on food security. We address a range of affordable housing issues for everybody everywhere in Colorado these days, and also in other locations. We will be pestering town staff and CPS staff repeatedly to tell us how they do different things and how that needs to get reflected in the code. We'll also talk to regional employers, people whose companies have an impact on what goes on in Silverton. We will be recruiting for a stakeholder committee. So we will post an application and ask people who would like to be more deeply involved in the project to join us on a regular basis. And we'll have that project schedule ready to go probably in the next week or so here. And then we always ask who else should be involved. There may be people who don't know they can be involved. There may be people who are not feeling particularly comfortable talking about zoning regulations or subdivision regulations or annexation. And we want to make sure that the project is open to everybody. So we do the same kind of activities that you guys were just talking about with water treatment. We'll come hang out in the coffee shop. We usually find that cookies and coffee or donuts get people to show up and talk to us. We go to community events. So the other thing we do is find you where you are having fun and ask if you want to talk about the project. So just a couple more slides. So opportunities for involvement. These will be big and small. We will do open houses and public meetings. It'll be a lot like the community meeting this evening. We'll tell you where the project is, what's going on, ask for feedback on specific subjects. We'll also do focus groups. So if we want to set up a downtown focus group, if we want to set up a recreation focus group, we will come up with a list. We'll ask if there are more groups that need to be involved, and we'll do in-person and virtual meetings with them across the project.
We will set up our stakeholder committee. So that group, we will lean on them to give us insight into the community and talk to us about what we are drafting in the regulations that might work and that might not work. We will do our very best to get things right, but sometimes we know getting an idea down on paper is only the beginning of the conversation about how it will work within the community. We will share our draft documents in meetings, in online presentations, and they'll be available for online comments. And we'll also take written comments if that's your preference. We can work with all kinds of comments. We will do some zoning map workshops in person and virtual. And actually we'll be using mapping and visual information across all these other meetings so we can start conceptualizing what kind of development comes out of the regulations that are being drafted. And then finally, on the project website, there'll be project background information. We'll keep notes from our meetings. We'll keep presentations there if you want to back up and take a look at things. And then we'll periodically put up surveys or individual topic questions to see who wants to weigh in and how. So here's our project schedule. Going forward, we are going to be working across the rest of this year and most of next year. Where you see the icons with people in them, will be on site doing meetings with the community. The first task that we do is project orientation. So we start bringing ourselves up to speed with the work that you have already done in an effort to ask better questions when we're there with you. Then we'll put together an annotated outline of the proposed regulation. So we'll take all of the information that Sheila just shared with you and format it into the code. The new code will bring in questions that we have from the current regulations, questions that we have from the Compass Master Plan, and share a booklet document with you of what the new code could be, and start asking questions about, are we addressing the right topics? Are there things we need to talk about in more detail? We'll draft the entire code in 3 sort of manageable chunks. We call them modules. We don't think anyone wants to read 50 to 150 pages of, I'm sorry, more like 200 pages of zoning code all at once. So we'll break it down and then we'll build those chunks. So they'll be iterative, they'll pull in together. And then finally, we move into the adoption process. So one of the things that we want to point out here is that the analysis has started. So we jump into those module updates, but we do check back with the analysis. So we're kind of telling you what we've heard, checking back that we're understanding it properly, adjusting. We do the same thing with each of the 3 modules that we draft. And we do that by sharing them out and getting input and bringing that back into the draft. Usually we try pretty hard to share the zoning information in a manner that isn't as legalistic as the document is. So we talk about real life experiences. We talk about projects on the ground. We try to make it as easy to understand the regulations as possible. Ultimately, we're writing a legal document, but we try to write a legal document that is very accessible to everyone who needs to use it. Sheila pointed out earlier that there will be more graphics than the, I think, no graphics that are in there, but there will be plenty of graphics. It's easier to understand what the code's supposed to be doing. In many cases, if there's a graphic to go with it, there'll also be tables and flowcharts. We know from our 30 years of experience doing this that there are certain places in the code that get heavy use. And so we try to make it easy for code users to find that information they're looking for, and then put the very detailed stuff in a place where it will get used by staff or CPS, but it's not as relevant to someone who just wants to understand what they can do on their property or what process they're going to need to go through to get their approval. So that's the big overview of the project. We'll be putting together some website information, some project background information. We'll be asking for stakeholder applications, stakeholder committee applications. And then we will be out in Silverton pretty quickly doing some initial meetings to try to get some feedback and to share where we think the project will be going. So Sheila, do you want us to take questions now, or do you want to finish up the presentation?
I think questions now while you're available would be good.
Great, thank you.
You have any questions for Elizabeth about the code update? I don't see any hand. Oh, I do. Yes.
Okay. How does the town and this project manage kind of transitioning from the old code to the new code? Will it be an all at once adoption, or will it be a slow rollout of each module?
So Elizabeth, did you hear the question, or do you want me to repeat it?
I did. The question was, how do we make that transition from the old code to the new code? That's a great question to start with, and we actually start answering that as we at the beginning of the project. In many communities, you make that transition fairly quickly from one to the next. We usually put some lag time in there. So we say that the new code will become effective 2 months after adoption, something along those lines, because we need a little bit of time for that last minute cleanup. Usually we bump into some issues at the end of drafting. But this is something that we talk about as we move forward through the drafting process. And we also add an entire section to the regulations that say, if you are proposing a project and you're at this place in the application process, you get to keep going forward under the old code. If you haven't submitted your application yet, you go forward under the new code. And we know that there are usually projects under the ground that actually live in between both codes. And so we try to get very clear about what standards apply to what projects. Because we may be doing some rezoning, and that is a conversation among the community and property owners. As we look at the zoning map and look at potential for rezoning, we will make sure that we have separate conversations about those also early and consistently through the process. Our goal is not to surprise anybody with the new code. This is a public document. We want everyone to know it's out there. Usually we start kind of slow with the public being involved, but it picks up steam over time. And so that's what we'll hope for with this code. So way more answer than you were looking for, but we have a process for that. So we'll follow it.
Any other questions? I know code is so exciting.
It is.
All right, I don't see any other hands. So thank you, Elizabeth. And then we'll keep going. I only have like 2 or 3 more slides. I promise they won't be quite as boring. Thanks, Elizabeth. So I'll jump to special projects. Again, you know, we're your contracted planning department. I'm from a small town. I love small towns. And that is what really CPS focuses on, is helping small towns with their planning projects, because small towns, you have a buy-in, you have people who love their communities, who are committed to their communities, and they know what's going on. It's a completely different ballgame than in a big town. And we love that. So that's why we're here. So we have special projects. Can you go to that next slide? So the one we're working on right now is the build out analysis. This is analysis of the town's capacity for available buildable land, water, sewer, and infrastructure needs, and what the ultimate build out of Silverton will be for demographics, population wise, economics, and capacity. So how are we doing this? We're currently working on GIS. Anyone know GIS? Your mapping data. Really cleaning it up so that we can get a clear vision from a mapping perspective on where are the available lands, once we know more about the water and sewer capacity, how much more can you actually build? So you'll have the build out analysis. And again, this is all coming from your master plan update and what you adopted, and trying to get us to that ultimate build out for the town. So the other thing from the master plan, next slide, please, is our 2024 work test. So what are we going to continue to work on? Build out analysis for now. We are ongoing development review throughout the year, so that's something we keep doing. But in 2024, annexation research, making sure that all the properties that were annexed into the town were done properly and they're actually in the town. I've worked in towns before where the property was treated like it was in the town. The annexation plat was never recorded. So technically it was never in the town. So they had to go through the process. So just making sure all the annexations were done properly and they're actually in the town. Looking at lots versus parcels. We have a lot of long skinny lots and then you have large parcels where people have built upon them. So really looking at what is the buildable area in the town, regardless of necessarily of what the legal description may be, lot 1, block 12 of whatever subdivision. Legal lots versus non-legal lots. I talked about that earlier. You can't just take a piece of property and subdivide it and deed it and sell it off to someone without going through the subdivision process in the town. So making sure we have all the legal lots identified, updating the zoning map, updating the hazard map, the overlay map, the Anima Street analysis, looking into that. We're also looking at the Shrine Hill sub area plan as phase 2. So we've done the constraints analysis to get an idea of it, but then moving on to the sub area plan to get an idea of how it can be built. Yes. DJ, Anima Street analysis.
Sorry, John just gave me some good news. Nerding out. So I'll actually maybe I'll give a broad overview, and if we want to go a little bit more detailed, John can talk about that. But what we've come to realize on the Animas Street is that most of the right of way is actually the river. And so most of town, and actually it's the town standards right now that you have to access your lot to a road, a street, not an alley. And so since that road is actually the river, you can't really access it. So we have to look at the accessing off the alley. And due to maintenance and operational constraints, the alleys are not wide enough to be able to plow, maintain, put everything that we need to and operate those accesses in an efficient manner. So that's what we're talking about there. There are a few blocks, 3-4 blocks or so, where you could see that only the corners, the side streets are developed because those are accessed. It's those middle lots that right now are not developed. So that was one of the things that we've talked about discussing and seeing what that could look like.
And then the last one is our ongoing development review. So that's pretty much it. I think the next slide is our last one. Yay. So do you have any questions for us about planning, what we can do to help you? If you want to talk to us and nerd out later about zoning and subdivision regulations, that'd be TJ. He loves.
We'll be doing a round table at coffee tomorrow morning. Yeah.
But anyway, we're here to help. So if you have any questions, you can come talk to us afterwards. We'll be here.
Well, I hope we all feel very supported with all of these people coming to our community and helping us through some really big challenges. But we have a lot ahead of us. And I'm really excited to get all this underway, and I hope you all are too. And I really appreciate you all coming out tonight. So thank you, and stick around and chat with our experts. We have a lot of nerds in this room, so nerd out. Thank you.
All right.